Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Blackwood. I'm the president of Ralston College, and I have the great pleasure today to be here with one of our former students, now an alumna of the college, and just coming to the end of her year as a fellow of Ralston College. That is Mari Otsu. I'd like to say a couple of words of introduction before we get into this conversation with Mari. This is really Mari's story that we're going to get into today. And there's a number of intertwining themes that I hope will come out. But fundamentally, this is a story of transformation, of how a young person shaped by a fractured culture and seeking meaning in, you might say, all the wrong places, found her way back to beauty, truth, friendship, and tradition. It's a journey through despair, art, ancient texts, and a longing for the divine. What this conversation is going to be about is not just a personal narrative, though. It's a reflection, I think, on a much larger cultural condition, and I think a hopeful glimpse forward. Mari, thanks so much for coming in to have this conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Blackwood. It's a real pleasure.
Well, we've gotten to know each other pretty well over the last couple of years, and I've gotten to the privilege of coming to know quite a bit about your story, and have some sense of how your time in education and educational institutions, and in particular at Ralston, of course, where I am, has played a role in that journey. But our listeners, most of them, other than those who may have seen the wonderful and very powerful seven-minute or so talk, which I'd encourage our listeners to go watch. You can see it on our YouTube channel at our roundtable symposium a couple of months ago. Some may have seen that, but would you give just maybe a bit of a thumbnail sketch of where you've come from, who you are, and how you got to the point that you were at when you decided to come to us?
Absolutely. I'm originally from Oahu, Hawaii, born and raised. I'm fourth generation Japanese American. My grandpa fought in World War II as a Nisei soldier. So very early on, actually, I was raised with, a sense of civic duty and actually a real sense of patriotism that sadly, I think by the time I was an adolescent, I fell into social media addiction. And from there, things just got worse. I became very anti-American, really cynical, all out of insecurity, I'm now realizing, and just a sense that I was nothing more than my body. I think that social media does. It's very especially damaging to young women, I think. And in college, all of this negative emotion, all of this internal chaos and confusion that I was experiencing was only further exacerbated by this kind of constellation of what I now recognize as rather communist ideologies, including, gender ideology, kind of radical feminism. All of these things came together, and I didn't know what they were, except that the only way I knew how to be in relationship with my peers was to go along with it. And sadly, I kind of became unknowingly a little bit of a social activist. And I didn't mean to. I just thought, well, I guess that this is what friendship is. All of us just kind of, just running together, seeking safety in each other, and pretending to perform for this cause. And I had no deeper sense that there was something much more enduring and much more special about what friendship could be. I think within myself, obviously, I always knew that there was something wrong. I just didn't know what the origin of my despair was, and there was so much coming at me, all of this bad stuff from every direction, that I really had a difficulty discerning that. Long story short, many little things helped, little adjustments such as therapy that really helped, because for the first time I felt like I could kind of vent openly to a person. I'm in a relationship with this person who's listening, and it kind of modeled for me what a conversation should actually be and how to explore my intuition and how to actually listen to my heart. But this was really a years-long process. And somewhere along the line at NYU, I was really drawn to classical beauty. And I saw through an article at the Epoch Times and then a bunch more articles there that there was this renewal movement going on in the art world. And actually, one of the ateliers that they were featuring happened to be just 10 minutes from my apartment. So I checked it out, and I felt I had this strong intuition that I really needed to go there. I was so drawn to this the beauty that they were producing. And it was actually there that I then heard about Ralston. And maybe we can get more into this later, but I was still seeking something. So that beauty was the first draw. And after spending some time there, I realized that it was really something beyond the beauty that was transcendent of just the form that I was learning. Although it was great to be in an atmosphere that valued skill so much, that I was still searching for something actually metaphysical that beauty reflected. And that was more something like moral beauty or like goodness itself at its highest form, And so, yeah, and then I came to Ralston, which was so transformative in many ways. The fellowship aspect of it, just dining 3 times a day with my cohort, 22 of us. Also poring over these books together that are all, in my view, teaching us, guiding us in a kind of spiritual ascent. They're in order to really activate these books, I think that one really must be engaged in a self-cultivation process. Like that's what Dante was up to. That's what Boethius was up to. They were cultivating themselves. And then, this magical thing happened. I started practicing this meditation practice at the same time called Falun Dafa. And that, became my own self-cultivation system while I'm reading these books that are teaching people over the millennia these treasures about how to cultivate. And that led into this year. And now I'm wanting to bring all of those treasures together somehow and share them with a much broader audience, because while I think Ralston is just this amazing, amazing treasure and this gift, unfortunately, I don't think everyone can have that privilege, and so I'd like to share it with the world more broadly.
Thank you. That's a great, very helpful sketch for us to have a sense of sort of the arc of your life up until this point. I'd like to, you've talked about you started out talking a little bit about social media in high school, and I want to maybe dig a little bit into, you referred in your talk last week to 2019 as a kind of spiritual low point or nadir in your life, kind of crisis of disorientation. And I wonder if you could unpack a little bit for us about what led you to there. And I think what I want to say for our listeners is that what you've said here about Dante and other figures who were you might say finding their way, that really is the essence, I think, of what human life is about. We need to find our way towards, let's say, what is true or good or meaningful or real. That's what the journey of life is. And ultimately, any education that's worth anything at all, in the highest sense at least, is about that. And so I know that this conversation is really going to be dwelling on these sort of really fundamental questions, like what are we? What are we looking for? How do we find it and live in relation to it? Yeah. And so, but I've been so moved at the way your own story is, and I've heard you put this in the language of sort of descent and ascent, which of course is one of the paradigms of not only of literature but of spiritual, movement and return. And so I'm wondering if you would maybe say a bit about what you regard as a kind of descent or the movement into disorientation. What were the factors? What were you looking for? What happened? What was the context? And I know that these are issues that many, many young people are facing and struggling with. So talk us about that.
Mm-hmm. 2 things immediately come to mind. The first is that in the past 6 months, I've realized just how beautiful, but also paradoxically, it almost sounds like there's going to be a reversal here when I talk about this, because now, conversely, having emerged from the Katabasis or the descent, I feel so grateful for having had it, because I feel that it allows me this now panoramic viewpoint. And I think I mentioned in my talk that, Inferno is 1/3 of the Divine Comedy. I mean, it's actually a necessary aspect of our own growth, I think, that we get to a certain point where we recognize our own suffering. And in my life, I felt as if my challenges were so psychologically visceral and exacerbated so that, I would actually recognize what I was in. And I've come to realize that is actually divine compassion showing itself, so that pain and suffering was actually the biggest gift. So that's the first thing, is that this sounds odd, but
no, and I think I'm so glad you said that, because that is one of the deepest insights of the philosophical tradition and the theological one, that nothing falls outside of
yes.
the omnipotence of goodness itself, of God itself, of love itself. Everyone might want to put it, but these are
Yeah.
not the easiest arguments, but they're fundamentally philosophical, not revealed or somehow things you have to believe on philosophical grounds alone. As Plato does, you can come to the understanding of the omnipotence of the good. But it's another thing not to grasp it simply philosophically, but actually to come to see that all difficulty, all fragmentation, all finitude, all suffering, in some sense, can be taken up and redeemed, and that's where that's what you've come to in relation to this period in your life. But tell us more about it as it was as a period of darkness.
Okay. Yeah. It was like Augustine stealing those pears. It was. Now I recognize that I could sense kind of the evil within my own heart, I guess is the best way to put it. But I didn't know to discern it as evil.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by evil's a big word to throw around? What do you mean?
Fear, maybe. Fear is the best way to put it. That I think I'd lived my whole life in a constant state of fear. And because that was my whole life, I actually didn't know that there was another way to exist. And I've had this realization too, that you can't really see upward. If you're here, you can see downward, but if you're here, you really can't perceive this. And so while there may have been people, and then also I happened to be attracting people that were at the same level or the same plane or invested in the same things. We were invested in seeking the gaze of the wrong things, something like external validation. And so that was my whole network at the time. And so I was just really kept in this very, very narrow and shallow frame of mind. And I don't mean that critically or judgmentally, just it was quite surface level, in that I think I was going about the world with an unconscious absolute materialism without even knowing that, really. So everything was just the very surface level of a person, the most superficial outer layer. I had the sense as I was walking down the street that all I would tally up in my head was this hierarchy of oppression to some degree. You know, what race, sex, age are you? Okay, I'm going to make an on-the-spot value judgment about how I should be in relation to you, which is so sad, you know, that before even coming into, and then how am I even to enter then? If I'm already making that kind of judgment, how can it be that I would even enter the conversation with goodwill? That's impossible, actually, in that state of mind, you know. And during COVID, I remember just judging in my head all of the people who were unmasked in the subway, thinking they want to kill me. I mean, these thoughts, all of these intrusive thoughts, feeling like I was going to die, and I would use that language. And isn't that odd language for someone who technically at the time would not have said with confidence that the soul even exists? I kept using the language, well, I feel like I'm dying. I feel like I'm dying. Clearly, it wasn't a physical death. So what exactly was it that I was
So you're saying that you think in that period, your kind of ideological possession, or the superstructure you had adopted as an interpretive framework for the world, was somehow animating or an expression of a deeper malaise or unhappiness or not at homeness or sickness even.
Yeah.
Say more about what did you think you were looking for?
I thought I was looking for safety. I think. I mean, it's just constantly pursuing safety via validation. You know, so and feeling like that validation, that fleeting kind of dopaminergic hit of praise or kind of external approval from someone else, whether that was a professor or a peer. And then we would just kind of group together, as I said, in that kind of herd mentality. I thought that was the definition of friendship. I'd never once really explored what it meant to actually share my own thoughts. I didn't know what that meant. That wasn't a concept that I was familiar with. And this has nothing, you know, I realize now that I'm the one to blame. At a certain point, I'd kind of developed these assumptions about the world and that I wasn't safe in it. And I think all of these ideologies, I think that's their purpose actually, is to keep a lot of these naive and impressionable young people. How convenient is that, to just keep them in a constant state of fear and not able to truly trust each other, not able to even have a concept of what trust and love actually are. That's really convenient because then you're very, very easily manipulated, I think.
So it's a preying upon our sort of fundamental desires or longings as human beings into kind of, whether intentionally or unintentionally, manipulating that into really quite sort of dark ends. Well, say a bit more about your time at NYU and the books you were reading, the ideological currents that you encountered, and how that what those were and how that played a role in your journey.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, in my talk, I think I referenced some of the most extreme, sadly, examples of that. And I had no idea at the time, but during my year abroad in Paris, I think that's when it especially hit this kind of pinnacle of extremity, where a couple of my professors at the time were actually these radical feminist activists, and I had no idea. And we were reading all of these books, and including I think The Straight Mind, I put in other essays by Monique Wittig, and I had nothing to measure it up against because I hadn't read the classical canon. That was all, And so I came to NYU very excited, seeking something, seeking independence, seeking personal intellectual growth, all of these things. I was impressionable and, just excited to be finally too in this big metropolitan place. And that's the food that we were given. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have kind of the structure or to comprehend what that was, because I think, by the way, that if you're lucky to know what that is, I think you can come into relationship with it and reject it quite easily. I think I could have chosen my way to classes that were more classical, where I think the difference really is, do you want a buffet of Haribo peaches or do you want a buffet of actual human food? What do you want to be feasting on all the time? This thing that's going to give you this hit, and then you just want more sugar all the time and everyone's on the sugar high as they're gathered around this table? Or do you want something that's going to nourish you long term, and while maybe it's not as sweet upon first taste, it's actually going to be long lasting, And I think that's the real difference. It's that, I didn't sadly have the structure to pave my way properly, because then I could have avoided those classes, but I was just eating up whatever I was fed. And so, I made I sadly fell into the mentality that, all of my negative emotion, then it all makes sense. It's due to all of these different collective social circumstances. And okay, then the antidote to this is to get really angry together along with the rest of my peers, and if we're just angry enough, things will change. Something will change socially. The government will take care of my suffering. That was the mentality, one of destruction really is that because I wasn't given the tradition, not any of it at all, often, sometimes we would read maybe secondary sources, but we weren't engaging with the primary text, which I think is really important, because that's where you really have access to the wisdom that could lead you on a spiritual ascent, I think. And by given this kind of second degree of removal from that, you're really not allowed to engage with it and to form your own opinion. It's like you're just given the opinion on it. But because of that, I was very, very vulnerable to falling into this herd mentality, and everyone around me was doing it. And because of the very exaggerated negative understanding I had of friendship, because of social media, where it's all sensationalized, where it is just dopamine, where it is just seeking safety, and such a huge fear of rejection. There's such huge sensitivity to rejection, I think, in high school. That's just what happened to me, as I got caught up in a very similar thing, but with these much more destructive ideologies, and I became destructive. I wanted to destroy because I thought that would alleviate suffering.
It's really just very sad the way in which these sort of cultural and ideological and frankly educational and intellectual movements feed into a very negative, let's say negative feedback loop, whereby they prey upon the natural inclinations and desires, for, I don't know, stability or some answers of how the world works, or an account, give an account of your own sadness or difficulty, or the own sorrow or pain in your life. Gives you a superstructure to interpret that according to these, whether narratives of oppression or whatever they are, and then that makes you angrier and less able to connect, and then more subject to the very ideological things that have gotten into a spiral. It's kind of a spiral downwards. So I know much more. Is there anything else you'd like to say about that period in your life? Because I want to turn now to what it was that, as it were, began to bring you out of this, sort of began, as it were, the movement of the ascent. But I want to first ask if there's anything else you'd like to say or to share with the people who will watch this, Murray, about that moment of sort of the low point, so to speak, of spiritual and intellectual crisis in your life.
Yeah, I think just one thing, which is that when I was just coming out of it, my inclination was to blame everyone, all my peers, et cetera, and all my professors, et cetera. And I've realized really how wrong that is. It is actually, I need to use spiritual language for this, because there's no other way for me to explain it in a way that's sufficient. I mean, even this, it really transcends language, I think. It is the specter. It's not any of us, is what I'm trying to say. Like that was a wrong understanding. Yes, it's exactly what you said. And I just want to emphasize that. It is how sad. That's my take on this, is that it's just a tragedy, because none of the way that those young people are acting is actually them. It is truly possession. And I have no sense of blame or fault placed in any of these people, because it really is how sad to live with such fear. And I believe that truly is a specter. It's not, you can't locate it. It's within all of us, and the capacity for all of us to go there is quite equal. I think every human heart, and so I would like just to say that I need to say these things because I need to tell a story. And so I need to say that this happened. On the other hand, I truly don't mean to blame. It's to describe and illustrate the situation with as much clarity as possible. But actually, all I see are these beautiful souls, really, every single one of them. And that's why I don't find it helpful to critique, quite frankly. And I think some media outlets do that, where it's just, let's focus on the 1% of the most extreme and mock them a little. And I think that's really wrongheaded, because it's, that capacity is available within each of us, and they're impressionable. And yeah, I know it's bad. It's bad.
Well, I think I don't think we are denying personal responsibility to, at the same time, say that it's not young people's fault that they are growing up in an absolutely deconstructed culture.
Yes.
It's not someone who's starving. It's not their fault that the food chains or the famine or whatever have been deconstructed to the point that there's nothing to eat.
Yes.
And this is something that I get quite animated about, because the burden of the transmission of culture is not meant to rest on the young, who are the least equipped to bear that burden. It's something that as it were, the old are meant to give to the young. And so it's not young people's fault that our culture is in the state that it is in. So let's turn now, Mari. What were the first inklings or signs or things that you thought, this is maybe not all there is. I'm going to follow the light or perception or intuition I have over here. What is the moment that things began to turn for you? How did that happen?
Mm-hmm. Well, God, there are many, many moments of that, but I did keep repeating in therapy. And I mean, even entering therapy, that's admitting that something is very wrong. I think the implicit assumption there is I need help, and also I need relational help. This can't be worked out on my own, which is, I truly don't believe that anyone can be alone in this. They need someone to learn as a template. I mean, I think you need another human person as a template, whether that's a mother, a father, a friend, a therapist, to be truly honest with, so you can learn that and take that process up into yourself and get more courageous and confident in your own intuition. So maybe even going to therapy, that was the first step, that, oh, wow, something is wrong. And then in therapy, I just kept repeating for years, what is wrong? I mean, something is still wrong. It's really just a deep sense that whether in, say, an interpersonal conflict, it's a moment-to-moment temporary kind of thing where I'm experiencing really volatile negative emotion, like something's wrong here, or a long period of stagnation where I just get the sense that I'm taking these classes, I'm getting my degree, but I don't feel like I'm going anywhere. Like, so I've forgotten something. I've forgotten something that's really, really important, and I couldn't shake that feeling. And it was in this moment. Oh, and I mean, among these things, there was physical illness too. So that's another big kind of realization. It's hitting me, right? Like, hello, your soul is calling out to you that you've forgotten it, and you've.
Do you think your physical maladies were related to spiritual, intellectual
Absolutely.
Challenges or dysfunctions you were facing?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I had terrible anxiety, terrible debilitating panic attacks. I needed to carry at some point a paper bag around with me. I think that was during when classes went to Zoom for COVID. I remember just sitting in those classes, and everyone was just a black square, right? And the street that I happened to live on at that time was right next to Mount Sinai. And so there were bodies in trucks on the streets right outside, and there were ambulances all day. So just, not beautiful, I mean, constant just death reminder outside. And then just, I would go to class and it was these black squares. And because of my own heightened rejection sensitivity, I read all of the black squares as hating me. That's what went through my head, is that everyone here is silently judging me. That's how bad the delusion was, is that even something like a black square, that's no information. Just imagine if they were looking, then I could interpret all of these other crazy things. And my mind is going to all of these places, trying to do the everyday mind reading to get that social approval. But even when it was just a black square, I would be interpreting it as rejection. But yeah, so at this time I was having debilitating panic and anxiety attacks. I also, though, had long-term illness I had gotten a breast implant surgery as an adolescent because I was I felt myself to be so ugly. And I was so obsessed with only that being the only way women are appraised is this physical dimension. And people now know, but silicone breast implants, you can get breast implant illness. They can leak, and you get all of these autoimmune disorders. And so there was also that. And I was quite literally ill from an adaptation that I made, a very kind of dramatic one, because I felt so completely empty and non-existent and worthless and ugly, all of these things. And I was doing my best to remedy that. So yeah, I was sick.
So I appreciate your sharing so candidly, Murray, and I know those listening will as well. Therapy, you say, played a role. Just the acknowledgement that you were not well, going to therapy at all is a kind of acknowledgement of that, as you said. Is there anything in particular you'd like to say that I want to try and trace how you began to put the pieces back together of a fragmented life? What role did that play fundamentally?
Therapy.
Therapy, yeah.
Actually, this connects perfectly to my final term paper at Ralston, so I'll just mention that a little bit, which is my final thesis was really that in order to reconstruct the cultural conditions here for human flourishing, we first need to reconstruct relationship and right relationship. And so I think my biggest takeaway from therapy is right relationship. It's not that I remember any particular conversation that we had, but I remember how he was there for me every single week, and to some degree it is this transactional relationship, but that actually opens up quite a lot of freedom, is that,
right.
Business relationships and these partnerships, it's like, okay, because this is fair, I now get to talk about myself
right.
this whole
right.
time, and it's boundaried, and you're not going to talk about yourself, and you're going to try to help me as an onlooker.
Did you feel that your therapist was genuinely of course, as you said, it's a transactional character. You're a medical professional of some kind, and I'm a person who wants what the services that you're providing. What I'm curious to ask is, did you feel that he or she was genuinely wanting the good for you, like in an uncynical way?
Absolutely. And actually, I still see him. It's been 8 years. Yeah. And I just saw him when I was at home in Hawaii. And I'm so blessed that it was him. That's another thing I've realized, is that there are just no coincidences in life.
Right, because there are people who go to therapy and they end up, in some sense, worse because the therapist, him or herself, has the same ideological, sort of ultimately cynical, fragmented worldview that can, just as encountering that in, I don't know, the works of radicals of various kinds in university can reinforce this negative sort of spiral. So too can a therapist reinforce that. But so what I'm wanting to tease out here is that was, at least in part, it was both acknowledging that you were not well, you needed help.
Yes.
And that's a real thing to do. That's a real thing for us as human beings to do.
Yes.
And it's a fundamental turn, because we start maybe asking real questions. What is not well? What would it mean for me to be well?
Yeah.
What can I do to get there? And it's you have a sense that it's not in you, the answer, in a sense. Or the asking of it is in you, but if it were all in you, that you could just solve the problem, you wouldn't be in the mess in the first place.
Yeah.
And so it turns you towards, let's say, maybe towards looking for larger or bigger answers outside of yourself.
Yes.
And so that's one thing. But then second, the therapist himself was someone who, in his relationship to you, there was an intrinsic renunciation of an ultimately cynic worldview, just because he genuinely was concerned for you.
Yes.
And that begins, you might say that's the drumbeat of an entirely different worldview emerging in that. I find that very moving, actually, because it actually attests to how sometimes a single interaction or a series of interactions with one person can be the means of transforming a life, because it is an anchor into something real and true and beautiful, and we need those things in order to find our way. So that was a key moment. I know that you then, from NYU, you have, of course, a decorated academic career with your 17 majors and all of these things. So you, of course, have been a person of significant intellectual ability and talent, I'm sure, since the day you were born. But you went from NYU, where you studied, what were the 3 or 4 or 6 subjects?
The majors were art history, psychology, French, and global liberal studies. Minors, child and adolescent mental health studies, and studio art. So generally art.
Okay.
And then human condition.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's where you were at NYU, and of course you talked in the lecture you gave for us a few weeks ago about your encounters with Karl Marx and radical gender theory and social critique, and I think a lot of that has come out in what we've said so far. I know that you went from there to the Grand Central Atelier.
Yeah.
Tell us about why you went there, and how you began to perceive what it was you thought you were looking for by going there.
Okay. 2019, I see an Epoch Times article. I didn't know what the Epoch Times was, so it's kind of a miracle that I found this page somehow. And it said, "A resurgence of art," and beautiful painting on the cover of this article. And I thought, wow, that looks like a Renaissance painting. And I click on it, and I realized that this is not a Renaissance painting. Actually, it was just made that year or something like that. And that this atelier that they're talking about it's very close to my apartment at the time. It's within walking distance. And then I start to see all of these other articles pop up. And I mean, they're making so many of these artists who are engaged in kind of this apprenticeship, Renaissance-inspired model of training, where it's not at all like modern art universities, where it's a lot about theory and concept. There is theory and concept, excuse me, but it's so based in the physics of light and trying in anatomy and gesture and form and all of the little steps. I would say it's like learning a language, really. You're just being able to put together a sentence so that you can express yourself. It's the absolute 180. It's completely the contrary to what modern universities right now have, I think, for their fine art degrees. And I got so excited. I was obsessive about it in the same way I think I was obsessive about Ralston's website. It was a call, there was something beyond just the images that I was seeing. And I think I just
What was
knew,
that? What do you think it was that was calling to you?
Well, I think now I can articulate that, but I wasn't even able to articulate it when I was there, right? It's just that first draw to beauty was really a draw to the highest possible characteristic of goodness and purity and virtue and a reflection of the creator in this human world. I mean, simply put, it's the divinity in all of us. That's I think what the call of beauty was. And that ultimately is the healing force. I mean, for whom and, for what do we actually exist, really? And to actually be seen in that light and that magnificence and in that glory, well, then that makes everything I was doing, the running around, the cosmetic surgery, that's so utterly superficial if you see that you are just good and pure and beautiful in that light, but that's, I only came to that realization, years after that. But that first draw was, I couldn't even really fully use the language of beauty in the circles I was in undergrad. I mean, it's a little bit of a dirty word. You have to kind of implicitly, it seemed to me that you could use it, but then you had to defend using it by...
Or put it in scare quotes or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this beautiful thing, but it was made by this white man. So, and here's all of the context about that, and let's focus on critiquing that for the rest of the time. Like, we're just not gonna centralize the beauty, and I wanted to make beauty central. So at that point, all that I knew was, God, what a relief to be in a community that's spending, it really comes down to where are you spending your time and energy, right? Like, we can discern that away as doing something that's maybe not good for the human psyche, right? What if you were to shift that attention and that time and that energy to only looking at that beautiful thing? So that's what I wanted to do. And I did that for a couple of years there.
We had a privilege of having Jacob Collins here at Ralston College, as you know, a few months ago, as part of, just prior to the symposium that you spoke at so wonderfully. He's the founder of the Grand Central Atelier, a great painter himself, obviously an inspired cultural, artistic entrepreneur, among other things, and a great artist himself. And so I want our listeners to know that they might want to check out the Grand Central Atelier. It's one of the most exciting new institutions of education that I've ever heard of. And so it sounds there as like you were drawn there because to what you now know was beauty in a kind of transcendent way, but it was arresting you, calling you out. And it had, in some sense, a fundamentally different character than the other ideals even that you had adopted, and that you devoted yourself there for a couple of years, I think, to learning these. What were you studying? Sort of to draw, to paint?
To draw and paint. So there's kind of two main tracks. You can do oil painting or sculpture, but both involve a drawing ear. Everyone needs to be, that's the foundation really, is understanding the physics of light and drawing. You need to be a good draftsman to be able to do anything after
Now, just let me ask you, before we move on, about this a little more, because it seems to me that what's going on there, in a way, is that you are submitting yourself to the disciplines of trying to truly encounter, form, the person you're sketching or painting, or what does it mean to accurately render this thing, and what does it mean for me to learn to submit myself to the processes that enable me to do that. Am I putting too much in this?
No, you're not at all. It's all of this, isn't it? It's scaffolding. Everything that we've talked about, we're building these concepts, right? Reverence, humility, humbling yourself before something. I mean, all of these these environments allow no time or space for that. I actually wanted to humble myself before something. I don't want to be, this individual who's just getting attention for critiquing something. And then that's what we're confronted with. But oh my God, what a relief to be sat in front of, my cast project was the Winged Victory of Samothrace, the beautiful,
So my favorite
in the
sculptures.
Louvre. Yeah, it's so arresting.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
The encounter, it literally completely arrests you. And I think I wrote that in my Ralston, in my admissions essay about what that experience was like, for hours, every day. It is like a 100-hour cast drawing. You sit and you try to do your best to convey those forms, in every line. And this is the thing I never really understood about other kind of more contemporary art theory or art schools, is this is so much deeper. This is theory, because you're sitting there and every moment is theory, actually. I mean, it's highly theoretical to be able to portray something in such a vivid and lifelike way, and you're trying to create the likeness of this thing. You're spending so much time, every crease, every fold, it's called turning the form. That's the way Jacob puts it, is you're constantly sculpting something 3D with your pencil. You are a sculptor. You're either tending toward the light or you're pushing under and flipping away from the light. And you're supposed to be latched on also, that was a word I used, lavin. In Greek, it's you're latching. And that obviously has so many implications, that verb, in even just breastfeeding, a mother latching on, eye contact, that first knowing, that first draw to something, that first, to grasp something, to understand it means to understand it. You're finally coming into contact with something and really knowing it, rather than being 2 degrees removed in critique, saying a bunch of intellectual academic jargon, which you'll never latch onto because none of it means anything, And so, I'm just little baby steps. First, right relationship with the therapist, and then, maybe understanding what humility and reverence is and what it really means to grasp something, what it really means to know something. And, getting curious about, what if I can take that and apply that to my own intuition? Whoa, what would happen there? If I took the concepts as I'm turning the form, what if that could apply to that's a little scary because I might be the only one thinking that. What does that mean about me? What does that mean about, all of the social acceptance I've been seeking my whole life? But yeah, each of these are timid little acts of courage,
It's I didn't know that that wonderful sculpture played such a role in your formation. It's an important sculpture for me too, just in the sense that it's one of my most defining aesthetic moments in my life was the encounter of the victory of Samothrace. Or is it Samothrace in Greece? Or
I was
just wondering.
Say that as we were talking. I hesitated.
The French, because it's in the Louvre. The
Yes,
French say La Victoire de Samothrace.
Yes,
I think.
yes.
But anyway, it's in the Louvre, and it's as you know, it's come up these stairs, and then there's stairs on either side, and it's set there the height in between these staircases to either side. But as you approach it, I think it's with the Italian Sculpture Gallery, you can't see it initially because the ceiling, if you're way back down that corridor, you can't see, because all you can see is the base of the stairway. And as you walk towards it, your viewpoint rises as you approach, you're able to see up the stairs. And though, of course, the sculpture's not moving, only you are. To me, it has the optical illusion as if you see this winged victory landing I think it was on the prow of a ship or something. Mm-hmm. So it's as if it's in motion. And anyway, listeners who are checking, check that out when you're next. If you have the great privilege of being in the Louvre in Paris, go see this magnificent sculpture that we just had this little aside on, but not an aside, because actually this encounter with beauty and with the particularity of the things that you were drawing played such a role in your own, as it were, spiritual intellectual journey. Let's move on now, Murray, to Ralston, or to the next moment in your journey. What was it that you were then looking for but had not yet discovered?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we were spending all of this time, communing around beauty, and that was lovely, and it was wonderful. But it was very skills-based. There wasn't, because what we were gathered around, understandably, is people want to become painters. They want to learn how to paint. So we're spending 12 hours a day learning how to do that really well. Amazing. However, I started to realize, and you would pull out friends one by one, that I was just dying to have a philosophical conversation about what the heck we were actually doing, and that a lot of them weren't very interested in that. They wanted to learn how to paint, and I started to get really hungry for having kind of only the philosophical conversation. I realized maybe I didn't see myself particularly just drawing or painting my whole life, that it was actually a means to something. And I made some great friends, and that's another important thing, is I made these amazing friends there. And I think that was because of my own shortcomings prior to this, because I'd lived with so much fear, I hadn't really understood how to do that. Now, fear is loosening, confidence is starting to build. I'm telling my friends truly what I think, and yeah, Ralston comes on my horizon, and that I find that so fascinating. The moment that you start to change spiritually, personally, intellectually, just inward change, everything outward starts to reflect that in your world and in my vision, And yeah, another thing is I started to listen to a ton of podcasts, because we're drawing the whole day and there's a lot of silence. I was actually able to listen to voices that I wasn't able to hear at NYU. And so Ralston comes on my horizon. I become obsessed with it. I need to go. The calling it's a very similar feeling to GCA. I don't quite know yet. Beauty got me this far, but now I want to know what is behind that. What is the structure of, what is this doing? Okay, also, because are we just going to continue to paint people realistically? Is that really the pinnacle? It's very pretty, very, very beautiful. But I feel that there's something behind that I've still lost. I still feel like I've left someone behind. I still feel like I've forgotten a part of my soul, And so that was the calling. It was, I want to figure this out metaphysically. What is behind that call to beauty? And then, frankly, a lot of things happened at once in Samos. It's a complete, oh my God, just overstimulation.
Well, so give our listeners a bit of a sense of, so you had this perception that maybe Ralston College was a place that might be able to help you, thinking about these things that you were wanting to understand.
Yeah.
Tell us what happened from there. Tell us something about your journey of why you decided to come. You told us a bit about what you thought you were looking for and what it is that you found and how that unfolded.
It was wild. It came together so quickly and with such perfect timing too. And I remember like finding it and then immediately writing my application and then turning it in, and then they responded really quickly. And I had my interview with Dr. Tardif and Dr. Conlon, I think, within the next week. And then that in and of itself was so validating of this being the next step, because in it, and I think I mentioned this in the lecture, but Dr. Conlon referred to my entire essay as evoking a sense of nostalgia or cultural amnesia, which is the first time I heard that term. So yeah, and there are so many myriad people along this journey who properly, because they were higher than me, they reflected what it was you are in compassionately. I mean, he just used that word. He said, it's really, there's this sense in your writing of this forgetting, this real collective cultural amnesia. And I thought, that's it. I don't know, because I'm in that, but thank you for putting that into words for me. And I remember that being a moment of, wow, I feel like I fit here, and I really need to go here. I still don't know exactly what it is, but, this is how I've lived my life for the past few years, and good things have come out of that. So I'm going to keep doing that.
And we may come back to this later about intuition and how one knows what the right next step is when one is confused or in living in darkness or forgetfulness or sadness or whatever. These are all conditions that every human being faces. So maybe we'll conclude with that. But give us most of our listeners may be familiar with this the Masters in Humanities program that Ralston College offers. It's our first degree program. But give us from your perspective, tell our listeners something about the structure of the program and your movement through it, and what some of the moments were that for you were important to the journey that you were on and to where you are now.
So the first 2 months of the program start in Greece, actually. First in Athens, and then we immediately board a ferry, which feels like a rite of passage, a 9-hour ferry.
It's meant to be.
To the island of Samos. Yeah, beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And it's both, I would say, it was like monastic to some degree, but also very, very connected. And there we start the ancient Greek and modern Greek language residency. So for 2 months, you're just completely immersed in this language, and it becomes a rhythm throughout the day where you go to class in the morning. And I mean, you're on the shores of Samos. The beach is right there. That makes a very big difference, I think. You're literally in the rhythms of the island. And you go to lunch with your entire cohort right out there on the deck of where the classroom was, back to Greek, do some work together, hop in the ocean, dinner, philosophy lecture. But at that time, we weren't yet writing quite a lot. It was just, the purpose was to learn Greek, and scattered sporadically throughout this, there are all of these trips, hiking up to the cave of Pythagoras together, a trip that we took to Patmos, and we read the Revelation of John the Cave where he had his revelation. I mean, it's just, I can't sum up the number of just so humbling and such incredible experiences. And it's so truncated in this very intensive 2-month period. And so that's where we started. But actually, just quick aside, that I sensed that something had completely changed even before the program officially began. I think someone made the mistake of actually hitting reply all to an email they weren't meant to, and our cohort was actually revealed to us a few days early, and someone made a Discord chat. I don't think we were supposed to meet each other before the first dinner in Athens, but a bunch of us did. And for one thing, we all knew who each other were before. You could just sense the aliveness and the excitement. And I think I've spoken to a lot of my cohort members about this recently, but just like the insane level of hunger and thirst that we had to finally speak our mind in a sincere way, like just how starving so many of us were. And I'd say maybe my position was a bit extreme. I'm coming out of this very desolate landscape, but I would say that many people felt that way, not just me. And so it was this coming together. We were so dehydrated, and yet we spent 12 hours walking around Athens and dining even before the program began, talking about what our favorite books were. I mean, there was so much hunger to just have, by the way, completely non-political. We didn't talk about politics the entire year, so that none of this is about, it's about that. It's
sharing
about
the same views in some shallower or instrumental or sort of sense.
It's being hungry to talk about something real, and actually that we're just constantly prevented from that by things like politics, like by things that actually don't mean anything. But that was already a huge 180 turn for me, is that look at all of these hungry people, and we're just so starving for this that we're going to be completely dehydrated and wander around Athens for the sake of these conversations. And no one's going to say, because we're all scared that it might end or that it was a dream, no one's going to say that they're hungry or thirsty. Like, we're just going to keep wandering around the whole day, and I would say that set the stage. That was the culture, is the kind of like intensity, but also I would say a sincerity to engage with all of these things, whether it's texts or the Greek, very, very deeply. And after those 2 months, we come back to Savannah and we read through the ancient, medieval, and modern periods in philosophy and literature. And for me, I know you love Boethius. Of course, you wrote your dissertation on his Consolations, but my favorite term was the medieval term. So my favorite authors were Dante, Boethius, Augustine. And I say that because they made sense of what came before and after for me, I think. They most explicitly of all the authors really wrote about deeply in these exquisite writings, a spiritual ascent, and provided really the tools of cultivation, self-cultivation. At the same moment in Samos, I myself started to practice the meditation practice, Falun Dafa. So all of this happened at the same time, my own personal cultivation with the encounter of these sincere and so excited and in good faith conversations with my cohort, like all the time, all day, at every meal, poring over things of actual just high merit in terms of being treasures, of ancient wisdom for, all of these years of civilization, divinely inspired tradition. And I mean, all of this is happening at the same time. So it's completely overwhelming to some degree. And it took a lot of this year, my fellowship year, for me to realize just how many things were happening at the same time that I hadn't had before. And then, of course, I've always loved writing. And I've made sense of a lot of how I made sense of what I was in prior to being in therapy was through writing. So that might have been what got me into therapy to begin with, is I was always an avid journaler, so I was always, even if what I was doing was venting, at least it was honest, and so I didn't know how to get out of it, but I did always use writing as this tool of contemplation. And yeah, so the writing component was deeply meaningful to me once we got back to Savannah. And as I said in my talk, I realized actually that my term 2, 3, and 4 papers, at the end of every term, we write 5,000, and then at the end of the year, 10,000 word paper that's about the ascent that we've made through these works of philosophy and literature. I realized that in those, implicitly, I was actually trying to make sense of what I was doing. So that term 2, I was asking myself, what about this beauty question? What did that mean to me? In term 2, I was asking, what about the spiritual ascent that we've made through tradition here with Dante? And then the final term paper was, okay, how do I take all of this and help this crisis that we're in? So in that way, it was like a perfectly accurate ascent there throughout the year. And that was not on purpose at the time. But I discovered that this year.
That's a magnificent account of your year and also of the program itself and its aims between the intensive language program in Greece, both the way in which that is meant to supercharge our students, to speed them and accelerate them through their learning of this difficult language, give them a really, really intensive beginning. You can go so fast, so far through that, but also the encounter with Greece itself and all of the wonders and beauties of this ancient place. And then finally, for the way in which this intensive experience shapes and brings together the students with each other. We try and set the conditions for something to happen there, but it's not, the college is not forging the friendships. The students are, and they become a self-developing and intensely wonderful community on their own, really. And then you've talked us through these next 3 terms. Before we conclude, Mari, I want to just ask a bit more about, if you would just say a word or two about, maybe a thinker or two, whether it's in the Middle Ages or otherwise, that played a role in your own ascent. As you said, in a way, what you were doing was writing your way through or thinking your way through, because in a way, that's what your journey through the program is. Of course, we've presented a kind of an argument. The professors have put together a very careful curriculum that is meant to help you unfold the history and development of Western civilization, its ideas and ideals, institutionally, in psychologically, theologically, philosophically, and so on. But every person has to chart their own course through that, and they do that, if they're doing that well, in a sense, in a way that they can actually understand for what it means for them. And that in a way, education is nothing other than that. So give us a sense of a few more sort of ideas or texts or moments of encounter with this very sort of infinitely rich tradition that were important to you.
Okay. For the second term, when I'm trying to figure out, and by second term, I mean it's actually the first term that we're in Savannah. So that was the ancient term. I would say a thinker that I ended up writing on a lot was Plotinus, and he, is taking a lot of inspiration from Plato. He's in conversation, in dialogue with Plato, but 600 years after the fact. And a lot of his writing is, like Aristotle, very much just not meant to be read to some degree. It's like kind of lecture note style, and so very contemplative, very just building. You get the sense that you're kind of, or I got the sense that you're kind of walking through this haze, and then there's a spark of kind of understanding as you're reading him. I mean, it's not, it doesn't read like some of the things that we read in the medieval term. But his treatise on beauty and on virtue were very meaningful to me in that term, and also this year as I think about the writing that I do for the general audience at the Epoch Times in the Fine Arts, because it solves the question of what really was I looking for in the beauty, and Plotinus believed that true beauty is this purification process, and that it's really so that we can fly, return as Odysseus did to the fatherland, to the homeland, to the one. I mean, not one that is in the human or the earthly realm, but our heavenly home. And in order to do that, you need to take off all of the layers of things that are not befitting of that, which I think Dante would agree with. I mean, take off the lust, the gluttony, the jealousy, all of these things, and free yourself of that to become, the inherent divinity that you actually are. And so that really got me thinking, oh, this is making sense of what I was perceiving or seeing behind all of the, very, very true, but it was not sufficient kind of beautiful forms that I was seeing. It's not just the surface level of putting together anatomy, gesture, all of these things. It is that, for sure. To be able to convey a beautiful thing, you need to learn how to speak that language. It's about learning how to speak that language with dignity. But behind that actually was this purification process, and I think that he articulates that really well. And funnily, at the very end of his treatise on beauty, so he's talking about this ascent to the one, and it's completely not, bound to the body at this point. At the very end, he actually invokes the image of a sculptor. So like people claim that Plotinus is not, he hates the body, he's a body hater. I would say that that's not completely true, because at the very end, the only metaphor that he has for us to use is that of the sculptor. And that's something that Michelangelo, I think, would really resonate with. And he actually he knew of Plotinus's writings through the translation by Marsilio Ficino. And, I think he thought a lot about that. It's very evident in his poetry that he's thinking about it as this process of just, he's doing this for the glorification of God. It's just, he's helping strip away all of this stuff. This rock, it already has this perfect divine image in it. It's just my hands that are helping glorify the creator. That's what he's doing. So Plotinus for that term, and then Dante for sure for the second. I mean, Augustine too. But I think Dante was very special to me, especially as it became so clear in my own personal cultivation that this was about letting go of a lot of attachments and those, I said, unhelpful notions and thoughts that I'd formed about myself my whole life. It was clear to me that that's what Dante was doing too, and that he needed a guide. He needed Virgil. I mean, he couldn't do this without himself, without Virgil. And I think so many people are looking for a teacher. They're looking for a guide. And he invokes all this language of, calling Virgil both his father and his mother, and I understood that as being the therapeutic relationship, my relationship with the sculpture in art, that you're learning as a template through these human or more worldly relationships, actually about the most important relationship, how to come into relationship with whatever version of the divine it is for you. With the creator, is that's the important thing that we're missing. We've become completely unplugged from that source, and that this is just giving us the scaffolding or the template to be able to finally do that. And even at the very end, Dante himself has to cede his poetry, his own art, like the very thing that got him there, all of his writing, to actually assimilate, to the Empyrean and the celestial rose. You can't go there with the identity of an artist. You even have to leave your concept of self or your artistic identity behind. And I think I really resonated with that at that point, because I was realizing just how wrong all of those things were that I thought about myself. I mean, implicitly, what was behind all of the adaptations that I was making? Well, I thought that I was inherently unlovable, forgettable, abandonable, ugly, not of any self-worth. I mean, all of these things that I'm sure must be affecting other young people too. That's the message, right? You're nothing more than your body. You're all of these things. How do you overcome that? Well, by trying to fit in, by trying to become pretty, doing all of these things, when really you're actually meant to none of that's true. We're all made in the image of the divine. We're all made in the image of God. You're not supposed to, that none of that's true. And it's as simple as that. It's overcomplicating it really to steer more in that direction and to kind of vent more about that. And I think that was really, the medieval term came at a time when I really needed that scaffolding too, that actually ends up in a very transcendent space that's completely beyond words. And Dante himself said that.
Thank you for that beautiful account, Mari. At one point, you described the talk that you gave at a round table as an attempt to emotionally operationalize the inferno you had lived through, and we just talked about Dante. What does it mean to tell the truth in that way, and why do you think it's necessary?
I think a lot of the books that we read last year were about recognition, like a self-recognition process that happens, whether that's in relationship to another person or within yourself. And I think that while so many forms that exist right now in society are definitely necessary to articulate things like, okay, researchers help show that there's a serious mental health crisis. We wouldn't have that data if it weren't for that research. So that's necessary and important. There are these forms and these ways of getting at the same thing or the same problem, articulating the same problem. And I just didn't think any of those were sufficient for a solution that was more uplifting. Okay, yes, we know that. That's established. The landscape is bad. And gratefully, we have statistics to refer to for that. But I think what's really missing is the sense of what it feels like to be in that so that one might recognize that and lift themselves out of that. Because the idea is not to stay there. That's what those ideologies would have you do. That's what I think some media would have you do, is just stay in that place. I mean, at the beginning of Constellations, Lady Philosophy says, how dare you you've kept him in this place with just giving him more poison. You're making him more sick. And I think that that's true. Whether it's kind of an intellectual or a spiritual virus right now, we're just full of things that are making us sicker. And I think that there's power in testimony because it offers a different mode of recognition that's more immediate. It's like, oh my God, that is me. Because I don't know what, I think to a certain degree, there's just perfect timing for all of these things. I don't know if I could have changed faster earlier. I don't even know if I don't wish it, because then I might not be here right now. I think it was all perfectly planned. But I do wonder if there would have been a more effective way of reaching me at that time, if it would have been something like, you don't need to live this way. Like, there really is another way. I know the amount of fear that you live in and with. Some people don't do that. And also, that's not a human way of being. That's actually not human at all. It has nothing to do with human flourishing. It's fear, and it's evil. It's nothing. It's nothing in the face of actual compassion and truly being good to each other.
Well, I always feel that the best conversations always start way more threads than they could possibly finish, and this could go for many hours. These topics we're on are so rich, and so there's so much more that I would love for us to be able to cover. But we've gotten through so much too, Mari, and maybe we can conclude where we began. You've talked about what it means to reach people, and if we were to go back to where we started, where you were in your crisis in high school and college in 2019 and so on, if you had one message to share with a young person today, someone who feels lost or angry, alienated, sad, cut off from the world, tradition, the past, and others, what would you want them to know or see?
I would want them to know that they are not alone, and they need to act on their intuition. I mean, figure out what that is first, truly. And I mean, that's usually much quieter than everything else that's demanding attention of you. At least in my life, it was, And so it's hard to even get a second alone with it. But be able to get that time to be alone with that intuition, and ask yourself what it is you're really thinking or feeling. And also, if you're already having the sense that it needn't be more specific than, I think something is wrong. then we can work with that. Then there's actually a solution to be found. So I guess, yeah, act on what we're trying to not validate all the time by pretending like there's nothing wrong. Validate that within yourself and pay it a lot of respect, and find at least one person with whom you can truly share all of those intuitions, who's open. And I think in the words of our rhetoric lecturer, Katie Rook, she always said a disinterested interest, and I loved that term. Find someone who has a disinterested interest in you, who doesn't have kind of an intention behind this and only wills your good, but can stay at this distance from you and just listen and listen and listen and see where that takes you. So act on that intuition with yourself, but also hopefully find that just at least minimum one person who you can tell all of your heart to and explore what's on your heart. And I think you won't be in the same place that you were in before if you do that sincerely.
Gosh, Mari, thank you for everything you've shared with me and our listeners today. Thank you for everything you've given to the Ralston College community. I know you are going to go far and burn bright.
Thank you so much, Dr. Blackwood. It's a real pleasure.